We all have to make financial decisions in our lives, whether that's going to the movies, taking public transport, or choosing to spend all our stimulus check money on GME stock. But perhaps the most consequential financial decision most Americans face today is whether to get a student loan. Student loans are currently a hot topic in American politics. As student debt has increased to frankly unsustainable levels, in September 2021, the Federal Reserve estimates that there are about $1.73 trillion in outstanding loans, and the number does not seem to be slowing down. In this video, we'll be looking at why college in the US has become so expensive and why some politicians have called for reform, or in some cases, debt cancellation. If you like explainers like this which dive into the details and drama of US politics and news, then be sure to subscribe. You can also find us on Twitter and Instagram for even shorter explainers, so you can stay informed while you scroll. We really appreciate your support. The direct cause of this increase is the spiralling cost of college tuition. Fees have gone up 1,200% since 1980, while inflation, as estimated by the Consumer Price Index, has gone up by only 236% at the same time. Despite the fact that college enrolment has begun to steadily fall from its peak in 2010, the sheer unaffordability of today's student loans means that the total US debt is still going up. So, this all begs the question, why is college in America so expensive today? Like many things in America, the story begins with World War II. World War II was interestingly one of the first wars that had people of all races and social classes fighting together at the same time. This is exemplified in the post-war US presidents. 8 consecutive post-war presidents, from Eisenhower to Bush Sr., all served in the military during the war and came from a wide variety of backgrounds. John F. Kennedy, a billionaire's son from the Northeast, fought in the same theatre as Richard Nixon, a poor farm boy from rural California. At the end of the war in 1945, 12.2 million Americans were serving in the armed forces. Congress, in response to the soldiers coming home, passed numerous bills to help returning veterans, including the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944, or, as it's most commonly known, the GI Bill. The GI Bill helped finance the education of numerous Americans who may not have been exposed to college or saw it as a potential opportunity. Before the war, colleges in America, especially those in the Northeast such as Harvard, Yale and Princeton, were seen more as social clubs among the elites rather than places of higher education. That changed with the GI Bill, when 7.8 million GIs packed classrooms in the post-war years, and total college enrolments increased from 500,000 in 1940 to 3.6 million in 1960. However, as more students went to college, colleges had to get more teachers and more facilities to support these teachers, and the cost of tuition fees started to rise. The US government, keen on increasing the number of college-educated graduates, in part because of the space race against the Soviets, decided to step in and pass the National Defense Education Act of 1958 and the Higher Education Act of 1965. This helped create scholarships, increased federal funding for education, and provided low-interest loans for students. These measures worked, and by the 1970s, with the baby boomer generation coming of age, millions of Americans were enrolling in college. Numerous jobs now required college education, leading President Lyndon Johnson to say higher education was no longer a luxury but a necessity. However, there were still problems. In the early 1960s, inflation was rising and budget problems stemming from the war in Vietnam made it difficult for Congress to lend directly, so instead it decided to just guarantee loans made by banks to keep interest rates low. It did this by creating a public sector enterprise called the Student Loan Marketing Association, or as it's known today, Sallie Mae. What Sallie Mae essentially did was buy loans from private banks to lend to students, with Uncle Sam watching to ensure the lending was done responsibly. This helped as more kids got to college, with increasing numbers of minorities and women enrolling as well. So, what changes led to the current crisis of today? Well, American attitudes. Ronald Reagan and the Republican Revolution of 1994 showed Americans wanted a less tax, more free market style of government. States decided to cut spending in certain areas in order to reduce taxes on their constituents. Many programs on the chopping block were educational ones, and as time went on, more and more American colleges started to depend less on the taxpayer and more on the student to pay for their costs. In addition to that, President Clinton made a deal with the Republican Congress in 1997 to begin the privatization of Sallie Mae, ultimately transforming it into a for-profit enterprise in 2004. Without government oversight, Sallie Mae's incentive structure changed, and it became entirely about the bottom line. And, well, maximising profit for a lender basically involves making loans more expensive and loaning them out to as many people as possible. Sallie Mae also successfully lobbied the government to make student loans essentially impossible to clear during bankruptcy. In 1998, the Higher Education Amendment made it such that student loans could only be discharged if it was proven that the loan was causing the borrower undue hardship, which is a much higher threshold than any other form of debt. Now, usually, if loans became more expensive, you'd expect enrolment to fall substantially, but stagnating incomes and employers' rising educational expectations pushed Americans to continue taking risks with, frankly, unaffordable student loans. And this is essentially why America has accumulated such a massive amount of student debt. $1.73 trillion spread across some 42 million Americans. Now, this is a bad thing for a few reasons. Obviously, it's bad for those people in crippling debt, but it's also not great news for Sallie Mae. Brookings estimates that by 2023, nearly 40% of borrowers are expected to default on their student loans. But it's also not good for America as a whole. Student debt exacerbates intergenerational inequality. After all, student loan debt disproportionately affects young people, and it's bad for the wider American economy. Higher household debt is bad for a load of reasons. It limits monetary and fiscal policy, reduces consumer spending, and increases the economy's vulnerability in recessions. So, what can Joe Biden and the US federal government do about it? A couple of solutions to start off could be expanding Pell Grants so that more college costs, especially that of lower income students, could be covered. Another could be lowering or cutting the interest rates. This could allow students to pay off their loans without the fear of growing interest payments. However, the two solutions that are the most well-known and controversial are a taxpayer-funded free college program and a student debt cancellation. First, the free college program. There have been free college-adjacent programs in some states across America. Currently, 19 states offer some form of taxpayer-paid tuition. They go from blue states such as New York, which offers Excelsior scholarships to cover up to $5,500 of a New Yorker's education, to red states like Tennessee, that has a program called the Tennessee Promise. Although these state programs seem to have worked well, there were questions about how this would work at the federal level. Biden's free college provision, before it was stripped out of the Build Back Better bill, would only pay for tuition, while leaving other fees like room and board still paid by the student. Also, answers about how to pay for it are still sketchy and vary depending on which politician you ask. No concrete plan to pay for it would run a deficit and increase the national debt, which is already at a staggering $29 trillion, possibly exacerbating inflationary pressures on the US economy. Now, let's get to the big idea supported by Senators Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and other members of the progressive left: mass student debt cancellation. We should say that while this policy is especially popular amongst the more left-leaning sections of the electorate, it's not actually that progressive. It might not feel like it, but graduates are still wealthier than average, and graduates still have significantly higher incomes than their non-graduate counterparts. But most economists agree that it's not great bang for your buck. For example, spending $1.73 trillion transforming childcare and early education, which the US is uniquely cheap on, would do more to help the poorest families and have a better impact on the wider American economy. Anyway, proponents of this policy state that under Section 432A of the Higher Education Act of 1965, there's a provision that states that the Education Department has the ability to modify, compromise, waive, or release any right, title, claim, lien, or demand, however acquired, including any equity or any right of redemption. In other words, the Federal Department of Education has the ability to forgive federally held loans as they see fit. Since a vast majority of student loans are held by the Education Department, and President Biden is the head of the federal government, he could simply sign an executive order mandating all federal loans under the Education Department's purview be forgiven. Although the constitutionality of this tremendous action is very much open for interpretation, the President of the United States has seen previously forgotten federal loans and stopped loan payments, albeit on a way smaller scale. President Biden has so far forgiven $11.5 billion in student loan under existing programs. Donald Trump also signed executive orders to waive student loan interest payments during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, furthering the executive precedent for big actions taken regarding loan forgiveness. Originally, this didn't look impossible. Biden campaigned on forgiving $10,000 in federal student loan debt for borrowers, but given the legislative deadlock in Congress at the moment, it's now looking very unlikely. In conclusion, going to college is a growing part of the American experience, and more jobs are becoming available exclusively to kids who went to college. However, the growing costs of attending are making potential students question whether the college experience is really worth it, and the current state of affairs does not indicate that that will change anytime soon. But anyway, what do you think? Should President Biden do more in regards to education? Should individual states? Or is the current system fine the way it is? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. As always, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to be notified every time we release a new video. Special thanks to our Patreon backers who make videos like this one possible, and if you want to see your name at the end of videos just like these people, then you can sign up using the link below.